Once again, today the topic is the 6 critical risks to identify in your software supply chain. Before we do begin, though, I'd like to introduce us as a business, Reversing Labs at a glance. We have the largest searchable threat repository of over 400 billion files. That is not a typo, that's billion with a B. That's 8 times larger than our nearest competitor. And one thing that a lot of folks don't know about us is that 60 cybersecurities are trusting RL to make their security products more capable. We analyze 20 million files a day with the fastest software file deconstruction capabilities that are going to surface a lot of the risks that we're talking about today. We identify about 3 million malware files a day. We have 300 employees globally. We're a 5-star rated partner program. We're recognized as a software supply chain security solution by Gartner, and we are a contributor to the Verizon DBIR report. I'm especially proud of that one. That's been required reading for myself and my team for the past however many years. And now I'm excited to be able to say that we contribute to it. Another polling question that we're interested in, true or false, are current SCA, SAST, or DAST tools provide adequate protection against software supply chain threats? This is always fun for me. All right, so we're kind of reaching steady state at around 80-20. 20% feel as though those technologies have them well covered. Okay, now it's 25-75. So this is a nice even way to end it. A quarter of us believe that those tools have us covered. 75% believe not so much. And let's kind of dive into why that might be. These tools have been around for a while. They certainly have value, but are they surfacing all the risks that we need to be aware of? When I talk about software supply chain risk, it really begins in the software, the thing that is moving through the supply chain that can be a bastion or a harbor for malware, for threats, for things that are going to cause us to be in the news for reasons we don't necessarily want to be in the news. A lot of us see this software as kind of a black box. It's hard to understand what's actually deep within it, and what could be manifesting only once it's deployed in our environment. At a surface level, there's some risks that we often talk about. Things like vulnerabilities and licenses have been part of our lexicon for years now. We have tooling in place to surface these, and we really see this. This is one of the main things I would say that comes to mind when we think about software supply chain security and the risks associated with our software. However, if we look more deeply, or if we look at how software is changing over time, we can surface more types of risks. And this is where those 6 risks come from. Throughout the course of this webinar, we're going to go one by one through each of these 6 risks. And I'm going to call on Andy and his years of expertise in working with businesses and helping them surface and mitigate against these risks to help us understand a little bit more about them. Another important thing that we must consider when assessing software supply chain security risks is that we must consider the entirety of that software. We can't just look at the open source code, which I think a lot of tooling does look at, because oftentimes that is something that we do and should fear. But a lot of the threats and risks lie within the proprietary, commercial, and the artifacts that get pulled in at the final build. So without further ado, let's jump into the 6 critical risks. The first is malware. And while malware is often something that comes to mind when we think about cybersecurity, and probably comes to mind when we think of software supply chain security, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye when it comes to software supply chain security. And this is where I call on my better half here, Andy Lewis, to tell us what we mean when we talk about malware in the software supply chain, and why Reversing Labs is uniquely suited to kind of have this conversation.
Yeah, so thanks, Dan. So for y'all that are just meeting me for the first time, I am Andy Lewis. I was the founder of the Denver and Boulder OWASP chapters. I've been playing in the AppSec space for a long time, and I can tell you that there aren't a lot of tools that actually give you insight into malware in your build, whether it's first party code or third party code. And so if you're gonna want to take a look at malware, and you kind of do, you want to have a good foundation. So if you could hit the next slide, please, Dan.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that both Dan and I found exciting about coming to Reversing Labs, what you're looking at here is we call it the RHA, the Reversing Labs hashing algorithm. And if you all think about code, compiled code it's the same series of ones and zeros across the artifact once you've deobfuscated and unpacked it. Same ones and zeros, same pattern. What Reversing Labs has done is gone ahead and kind of calibrated that to say, okay, well, everything we look at, we're going to look for those matches. So if the North Koreans have released, 0-day malware yesterday, and a part of that is this little thing that is a command and control module. When they release today's 0-day, if it's the same command and control module, because let's face it, developers reuse code, if we see that, that gives us the ability to have an opinion. And by the way, we're looking across a 27 petabyte sample. And so when you look at this graph, what you're seeing is that, hey, you know what? Most of the files that you're looking at, they're unique. You don't see that pattern matching in a meaningful malware kind of way. But there's a bunch of them that do. And so when you start to talk about true 0-day malware, especially if there's component reuse, if you want to have malware checking as a part of your CI/CD pipeline or as a part of your ingest process when you're onboarding software, it kind of makes sense to know what all the other bad stuff has looked like all the way down to that subroutine level. So hope that makes sense. I get that all right, Dan?
You did. And I appreciate that double click. I think malware, especially, and you brought up, North Korea and 0 days. When it comes to software supply chain attacks, these tend to be the sophisticated kind. And simple signatures and traditional hashing is really not going to do the job. So we need to be able to really inspect these binaries deeply and to do some pattern matching in a way that goes beyond some of the traditional methods if we're going to surface a software supply chain attack that's leveraging malware. So tell us a little bit about, stopping the next attack as it pertains to malware.
Okay, well, again, I think when you think about malware as a part of your build, we'll walk you through a couple of examples. But the bottom line is, if you've been doing this for a while, you've probably heard this expression that prevention is important, but detection is critical. You want to be able to up your detection, whether you're buying or whether you're building. You would like to have a better understanding of, hey, are we getting ready to ship malware? It's kind of an important question to answer. And then, hey, are we getting ready to deploy an infected update or an infected package? Hey, did we just close out an RFP and sign a check for 7 figures for some stuff that's going to backdoor our whole organization? So we can help you with that. I miss anything there, Dan?
No, yeah, the opposite of the gift that keeps on giving here.
There
That's
you
a,
go.
that's a great analysis. I appreciate that. So yeah, so you're really going to want to be able to surface any malware that's present and have a plan of attack, whether that's from a procurement side of things or the release side of things. So let's dive into the next one. The next one is one of the less talked about software supply chain risks, but that is, has the software been tampered with? And what I'm kind of talking about here, and there's, I guess, a few ways that this can manifest is, say your software is behaving one way yesterday, and then today in an entirely different manner. It's got new capabilities. It's doing things that you wouldn't expect. you want to be able to surface that as a potential risk and understand, was that change in behavior necessary? Was it expected? Was it known? And if not, you might have a supply chain attack on your hands. Andy, tell us about this real red flag in the context of some infamous breaches, if you would.
Yeah, you bet. So a lot of times, this is the one and only red flag, is that something is just not quite right with the signature or assigned component. The other thing that Dan alluded to was sometimes, hey, all of a sudden, if you're assessing behaviors, the last build didn't check to see if it's running in a virtualized environment, didn't turn on the microphone or the webcam either. This build does, and maybe that's intended, but it's not in the release notes. Huh. It's not necessarily the end of the world, but it's a question you got to answer. And so when you look at some of these, and we'll dive in a little bit, if you could, Dan, let's go to the next slide.
Sure. So yeah, and by the way, what we have here is a simplified version of the salsa framework. You may not be familiar with it, and it's okay if you're not. But the salsa framework gives us kind of language to software supply chain attacks. And what we've done is we've mapped some of these kind of headline worthy or infamous attacks to the salsa framework and shown kind of where they manifest. And what I think is really extremely important to note here is that they're not always due to open source issues or vulnerabilities, and that if we had been focused, and a lot of folks were, on security controls at the open source or the vulnerability level, and myopically focused on those, had blinders to things like tampering, we would have likely missed some of these attacks. So at this point, we're going to actually do a one by one dive into SolarWinds, UA parser, and 3CX. With Andy's expertise to understand these attacks a little bit better. If you could, Andy, let's start with 3CX.
Yeah, okay. So, and Pippin, we'll talk about XZ utils briefly too. But for 3CX, if you're not familiar with it, 3CX is a voice over IP provider, and great community around that software, and great community, kind of a forum. And one day, after they'd had a problem, one day somebody jumped into the forum and said, "Hey, this stuff is kind of looking like malware." And so the team at 3CX checked it and said, you know what, it's not. And so shortly after that, another security vendor came out and told the whole world, yeah, this latest release is malware. And if you've installed it, you are backdoored. And in the case of 3CX, we believe it was the North Koreans, and the one and only red flag was, a lot of people don't know about this vulnerability, but there's a Windows vulnerability that will trust partially signed packages. And so what the bad guys did in this case, again, it looks like an integrity problem or a trust problem. This release was the first release where the signature took advantage of that Windows flaw and said, yeah, go ahead and trust this. We've accounted for this much. And of course, the back end of it was malware, right? So with 3CX, fortunately, no sensitive data ever goes across voice over IP networks. So not a big deal. Okay, just kidding. So 3CX, it was an exercise in, hey, our pipeline itself has been compromised by bad actors. We've released something that basically lets them own any of our customers that install that release. And then their instrumentation, and guys, these are great guys. I mean, 3CX is a wonderful team. If you drop into their community, you'll see that they're very popular with their customers. but they, sometimes if you're not instrumented right, you can do things like, hey, no, that's not quite backdoored, we're fine. And then assure your customers that, hey, we fixed it when it maybe hasn't actually been fixed. And then get instrumented correctly to actually find and eliminate the real problem that was the backdoor you were shipping.
Hmm.
So hope I got all that, Dan. But 3CX, a lot of, so if you've been in this space for a while, a lot of these stories are going to be about organizations that got knocked flat on their backs by some bad actors and came back. And 3CX is one of those stories where they're amazing now. So I get everything there, Dan.
You did. I appreciate it. And let's jump on to the next one. It's another another
Yeah, this one's a little
sophisticated
different.
threat, but maybe in a slightly less nation state oriented manner.
Yeah, yeah. So this one's really fun. So UA Parser JS is an NPM library. It gets about 3 million downloads a month or a week. I'm sorry. And if you're building a web server that is able to render differently based on somebody attaching with their iPhone or their Android phone or their Windows system, there's a pretty good chance you're using UA Parser JS too. It was an example of a package that was maintained by a single individual, and that single individual's credentials were compromised. And the team that compromised it, frankly, there are a bunch of clowns from over there in, we'll just say East, and they were after money. So all of a sudden, the maintainer starts to get crazy levels of spam and thinks he might have a problem. On forums up there on GitHub for this package, all of a sudden, people are popping up and going, hey, this thing's doing something a little bit surprising. And is it malware? And, if you follow that thread, you'll see people kind of have that moment where they're like, this thing is malware. This thing is downloading a second stage. This thing is backdooring anything that tries to run it. This thing's got a problem. And so with UA Parser JS, the single maintainer eventually reached out for help, cleaned it all up. Imagine the quality of those 3 same-day commits, commit, commit, commit. Hey, it's clean. He actually did a great job because he leveraged a technology called diff. So he was able to look and see in great detail what the bad guys had done relative to the previous build and just start scrubbing code. And so when we start to talk about, some of these things you need to look at, behavioral diff is another one,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Where again, yeah,
There's no understanding tampering without understanding behavioral differentiation. I completely agree.
yeah.
Awesome. So let's do this last one. I think folks know this one pretty well. So let's cruise through SolarWinds and get on to the next.
All right. So SolarWinds guys, cut to the chase. Hey, several months before they released the backdoored version, there was a sudden appearance of a new class library. Again, is that the end of the world? No, but it's a question that has to be answered. And so I think SolarWinds, if you're familiar with anybody that was on the wrong side of that deployment, it was a very bad Christmas for everybody, right? SolarWinds Christmas, not so good, right? But that's okay. We got around it and had Log4j Christmas the next Christmas, so that was okay. So anyway, SolarWinds, those guys again, another incredible success story where having that full instrumentation for software static analysis, for software composition analysis, for static analysis, and dynamic analysis, having that full instrument stack and still not realizing that there was a problem that your stack was actually owned.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Absolutely. Um, and again, a case where you didn't have vulnerabilities to rely on or vulnerability assessments to rely on. You really had to understand how that software changed from one day to the next. Um, so go ahead and walk us through stopping the next attack if via tampering detection, if you would, Andy.
sure. So Pippin, for your question, how would we have helped stop that detect or that attack? Again, it's the behavior that the backdoored version brought in was living off the land, right? Without getting too far into the weeds, it would invoke a utility called certutil that would then download a second stage, and that second stage is where the ugliness was, right? So again, by understanding that radical behavior change and just asking, hey, was this intentional? That's one way. Since we don't expect a lot of people to understand that or know that, we can tell you that across 27 petabytes of samples, both good and bad, we've realized that only malware invokes that behavior. So we made a very simple rule that says, hey, if your release is doing this, oops, you've got a problem. So that's how we can help you with stopping the next attack. You don't have to be a PhD. We'll try and abstract those things that are meaningful and let you nip it in the bud.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And for those who have your hand up, please use the chat, the Q&A functionality, and type in your questions, and we'll be sure to address them. But we really appreciate the engagement, and for the individual whose hand is up, please go ahead and use that. We'd love to see your question. All right, keeping up pace. Let's talk now, Andy, a little bit about vulnerabilities. This was one of the ones that I mentioned is pretty commonly kind of comes to mind when we think of software
Yeah.
supply chain issues and software supply chain attacks, but it's kind of one of those things where we've got a massive list of CVEs to take care of, right? It's not as simple as what are the CVEs. I think it comes down to prioritizing those and
Yes.
figuring out which to address first. So tell me a little bit about how some of the ways in which you could approach the and Stanley, we'll certainly get to your question as well. We appreciate those and keep those coming. But for now, Andy, tell us about how we would prioritize vulnerabilities when we have so
Sure.
many to deal with.
So one of the consequences of a big event like Log4j is that it got worldwide attention, and now everybody's kind of dogpiling on to get better at this whole vulnerability thing. So one of the ways to do that is to make sure that the vulnerable surface is actually evident in the release. Not that, hey, this is log4j, but it is log4j and the specific vulnerability is available or part of that call chain within the package, right? And so that's one of the things that we bring to the table. Again, just using that binary pattern matching. Like, hey, there is a subroutine, it's a vulnerable subroutine, it looks like this, and it's not here.
Mm.
So again, that helps you prioritize.
I love that. So now you know, here's what I'm going to do today. Here's what I'm going to do tomorrow, and so on. You've got your prioritization by triaging and determining and matching that against a malware repository, and that sounds like a really powerful mechanism for that. So let's take this one home with stopping the next attack with vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So again, same concept, right? So vulnerabilities aren't the whole show, but they are important. There are two things that we can help you with here. One, if you're somebody that's building software and you're detecting a vulnerable version of Log4j in your release, for example, but that vulnerability isn't actually surfaced, you can do a vex statement. And if you've been working with that, then that's basically a formal way of telling your customers or your consumers, yeah, it's there, but it ain't a problem,
Mm.
right? So that's a way to address vulnerabilities. But again, detection is the big thing. One of the things that made Log4j such a lousy Christmas it was nobody could tell you where it was. And so if you have an understanding on a component level based on binary, not access to source, but based on that compiled release, now it doesn't matter if you're doing the release or if you're consuming the release, you've got an inventory. Log4j is everywhere. I don't need to email my vendors at all, other than the ones that have it. So
Hmm.
that's how we can help there.
Yeah, so we talked about having a poll question of how many Christmases will go by before the next lousy Christmas. I think we'll do that next time. I'm interested to hear what people's bet is. But yeah, Andy, you make really great points. Here we have the do not release, do not deploy. I don't think you can have a do not deploy if there's the presence of any one CVE. But if you can really pare it down to the presence of a malware exploited vulnerability, then you might want to say do not deploy. We really don't want security controls to be the enemy of productivity if it doesn't have to be. And being able to triage is really that mechanism. So yeah, I appreciate that, Andy, so much.
There you
All
go.
right, hardening gaps. This one is a little bit nuanced, a little bit less obvious, right? There's not the presence of malware per se. There's not the presence of a CVE per se, but there's the presence of some issue that needs mitigation that could lead to a threat. I think it's really important to give language to these types of issues because without the language, we're really not looking at it. So, Andy, hardening gaps. Tell us
All
about
right.
it with XE utils as an example. And to the individual who asked about that, we went into the deck and changed it just to suit your question while the presentation was going. So here we go. XE utils,
There
hardening
you go.
gaps.
All right, so Pippin, I like your answer about how many Christmases. Thank you for doing that. XEUtils, if you're not familiar with it, XEUtils is a critical security component that underlies e- every major Linux distro and many other packages. And so what happened with XEUtils is this guy Andres one day basically had his CPU start glowing red, and it's because the latest update had a problem that hadn't been accounted for. And so Dan, if you could hit the next slide, right? And so if you look at this timeline, this is again at the time way over to the left. XEUtils, that critical package for every Linux distro, was maintained by a single individual. That guy's quality of life was a real problem for him. This guy drops in out of nowhere named Gia Tan. And by the way, we've got an excellent webinar on this whole thing if you're interested. All right. And just starts to, hey, I've got a commit, I've got a pull request. Hey, this will clean up this. I took a little load off your hands here. And before you know it, he's able to go ahead and do updates. And the first red flag for XE is something that every consumer would have ignored, right? The first red flag was that in order to backdoor a release, he had to reduce the overall security posture in terms of taking advantage of system calls within operating systems that represent hardening, right? And so that was the first red flag. You wouldn't have looked for it. You probably, unless you're a three-letter agency, you probably wouldn't have been triggered by that. You would have known about it, which is always nice. But if you're a producer and you see something like that, again, this is a big deal. Hey, somebody on my team is no longer hardening this component of the app so that now it is more susceptible to this form of attack or this form of attack. And people are rarely instrumenting to detect that. So with
Yeah.
XZ, the punchline is made it all the way into the beta distros of some of the major Linux releases, which is how it was found. So for exeutils, what did that look like? Next slide, please. So in a normal release, hey, the user is going to SSH in. SSH has a dependency on exeutils. Hey, they get their session going with the system. Life is good. Next slide, please. And all of a sudden, if you got the backdoored release, then what you thought was a secure session isn't really a secure session anymore. Next slide, please, Dan. And so what we can do for that, again, remember, gang, this is not something that you would likely have flagged and acted on because it was very, very subtle as a consumer. But as a producer, when you see this, this ain't how we write code. Why are we doing this? Why is the new guy doing that? And I do have customers right now that have got, shops across the world that are contributing to their releases. And so they look for those kinds of things like, hey, why did the latest why did the latest pull request from over 25 time zones to the left here, why did that reduce the security posture, right? So you can check for that can help you stop the attack. As a consumer, it's a real long shot, gang. But as a producer, I've got people that use that right now as one of the things that they check from their distributed teams when code's being checked in. So I get that all, Dan. I
You
forget anything
did, yeah.
important? Okay,
And
good.
I think hardening is so important. It's been a while since I've read Orwell, but I think I remember in that book they started taking words out of the dictionary, and as a result, people didn't have those thoughts. And I think that's kind of one of the problems with this is it's not doesn't have a CVE. It doesn't even have a name, these kind of issues. Like here at Reversing Labs, we call them hardening gaps. If someone wants to give us a better name for it, please do. But I think it's really important to give name to this issue because once we have a name for it, we can start to address it. But it's there's no malware present, there's no CVE present, but something's wrong that needs to be addressed. So this one I put at the top of importance, despite it being at the bottom, I think of spotlight. It's not a celebrity issue, but it's a real one. So thank you, Andy. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Secrets. Um, Another one we kind of talk about sometimes, but I think just how nasty a secret can be and it is something that I think we need to focus on a little bit more. So,
Yeah.
hair on
It,
fire or old news, Andy? Tell me.
yeah, look, it's not a surprise if you release your AWS API master key, you don't own your environment anymore. That's not hard to figure out. Same thing, if your GitHub tokens are out there on the internet, it, you don't own your environment anymore. One of the things that we bring to the table here, though, is look, there's stuff out there with embedded secrets all over the place. Uh, you know, again, do you go all hands on deck? Do you light your hair on fire for something that, yeah, it's in there, but it's not live? What you're looking at right now, so this is from our Spectra Assure portal, and you can see there's a level 4 fail up there on the top row, and it's because these credentials are live. So a
Hmm.
part of what we do, again, to bring speed to the process, there are levels of risk. Having an embedded secret is probably not a great idea, but sometimes there are reasons for it, right? Having an embedded secret that responds when something tries to authenticate using it, that's probably a different level of risk. And so that's what we're showing you here is that we do test and we'll tell you whether the test came back and said, yeah, we were able to authenticate using that GitHub path, for
Hmm.
example, or not. And you also see kind of that longevity too. Hey, so this thing's been on the street for about a year, right? So there you go.
Thanks, Andy. I think it's a great point, this liveness check. If we were to take every little thing that goes bump in the night and say stop shit, stop deploy, um, I'd say the security teams would cost more than they were worth. It's about finding the material risk that's
There you
actually
go.
going to lead to an issue, making that distinction between something that we need to act on and something that we just need to be aware of. And having that deep visibility and understanding in the case of secrets, a liveness check really allows us to have a tool that is going to balance that productivity, get things done, say yes, with no, really, we actually have to say no today. That's I really like calling that out. Not all secrets are the same. And so when it comes to this type of issue, you need to be able to have that distinction. And I might have already trampled through this.
Yep, there
So,
you go.
anything more you want to add at this phase?
No, I think just, a lot of people will test for it if they've got access to source. A lot of security teams haven't worked it out with their development teams. And remember, I've been doing this off and on since I founded it in a lost chapter in 2006. There can be a lot of friction between the security team and the development team where the security team's never going to get access to source. Well, if you got access to the release, and you can test it for secrets. You can fail that build, get back to the developers and go, hey, we don't want to do this.
100%. All right. Bring us home with the final one, licenses. This was another one that I kind of said was the the household name, the celebrity risk alongside vulnerabilities. But I think there's a little more that meets the eye here as well. Let's talk
Yeah.
about how real this risk can be and when it is especially real.
Yeah. So if you've been dealing in the risk world for a while, you understand the difference between material risk and risk. What you're looking at is just a screenshot from Wikipedia. There's a very large company that got on the wrong side of an open source license, and it turned out to be a material problem for them. So if you're not familiar with that, if you don't understand that, there are a lot of great resources out there. I'm happy to talk about it. I don't like talking about it as much as I like talking about security because this risk involves lawyers, not my thing. So next slide, please.
Okay, moving on.
And same kind of thing, right? If you're familiar with the enduring security framework guidance that's been published by the NSA, by the United States NSA, they treat this risk differently depending on whether you are a producer or a consumer. And so it's still important to understand it, and it's possible, depending on the nature of the license or the intellectual property, there may be risk. But again, if you're blind, you're blind. We can help you see.
Absolutely. All right, folks. So those are the six risks. Thanks, Andy, so much for the double click on each one. I think there's more to meet the eye with each, and it was really important to get that insight. Here at Reversing Labs, we have a dedicated approach to each of these that Andy highlighted, but I want to quickly run through each of those to talk about how, understanding each of these risks requires special capabilities and deep insight. So first, with malware, RL combines in-house developed classification technologies, threat intelligence, and analysts vetted results to provide the most accurate threat verdicts. Excuse me. For tampering, we stop novel supply chain attacks by monitoring the evolution of an application behaviors and software risks across subsequent releases. That differential analysis we talked about. For vulnerabilities, we're able to prioritize the remediation of known vulnerabilities by leveraging threat intelligence to serve as active exploitation, malware abuse, and patching mandates. Remember, I mentioned those, and so did Andy, those 400 billion files in the repository we have of goodware and malware. That's going to really help us leverage. That's that threat intelligence that we're talking about. Hardening gaps. In this case, we provide an in-depth view of application and container misconfigurations while measuring coverage and effectiveness of security controls. For secrets, we provide secrets detection, validation, and public leak detection uh, solutions that uncover secrets buried deep within application packages. And last but not least, RL protects organizations from material risks caused by the use, deployment, modification, and patent limitations for software covered by restricted open source and commercial licenses. So how do we do this? The topic of today's webinar was really to get into those 6 risks. But I do want to touch on a little bit at a high level how we do this. If you want to see it further, I'd recommend engaging us with a demo, and we can show you the details of how this works. It's technology that we're quite proud of and have been developing for the past 15 years. But it's called complex binary analysis. And effectively, you can take a binary, run it through our engine, and we are going to surface each and every one of those 6 risks and if they're present within your malware. It's a primary control that's going to identify malware, tampering, and more in minutes without source code. We're also going to give you an SBOM in case that's something that you're interested in. So, what does the output look like? The output comes in the form of a SAFE report. The Spectre Assure Software Assurance Foundational Evaluation, or SAFE, delivers the most comprehensive SBOM and risk assessment for an application. So you can see here, we give you that 1 through 5 score. If you just need a hey, quick, hey, is this okay or not? We'll give you the number of issues found against our various policies that you can double click on. We will show you all the vulnerabilities and those that are patch mandated. So in this case, you see a lot here, right? Not everything you're going to do in one day. We're going to help you decide what to do first and if there's malicious files. Those are broken down into the 6 categories we talked about today, which come in the form of compliance under licenses and secrets, security, vulnerabilities and hardening, and threats, tampering, and malware. And again, we have those safe levels 1 through 5, 5 being squeaky, clean, pristine software, 1 or 0 being software that you are not going to want to ship or deploy. And this is all clickable, interactive. We'd love to walk you through it if you're interested in taking a demo. These come in 3 main forms. One is in our UI, Spectre Assure the product itself. You can click through it. We also offer a shareable safe report. So say you are procuring software, you run it through this, you decide, hey, this isn't acceptable, and you want to share all that information with your vendor who isn't a customer. They can actually take this shareable safe report. It's time bound, password constrained, and they can look through the issues and you can highlight what you need them to fix in order to be comfortable buying their software. We have some great examples of companies, one large biomedical firm who used a safe report to get a vendor to fix their software to the point where they were comfortable consuming it. Really cool story. And then you can archive these safe reports for compliance or future use. So that question we asked at the beginning, we want to ask it one more time. True or false? Our current SCA, SAST, or DAST tools provide adequate protection against software supply chain threats. If you could please put the poll on the screen for us to chime in again and decide how they feel about the very same question once again. Okay, we have the poll up.
I'm gonna be very disappointed if the results are the same or worse.
All right, results are coming in about the same. So we'd love to engage in a conversation about why that is. You know, here at Reversing Labs, we believe that you need to go beyond these types of technologies, bringing in something called binary analysis and understand the complete picture to go beyond just open source, to go beyond vulnerabilities, and to go beyond just your source code to get a complete view of the threats that lie within our software. Before we open it up to questions, and we did deliberately leave a few minutes at the end, we want to talk to you about some upcoming events that we're hosting and some additional resources. On March 20th, Dave Ferguson, our Director of Technical Product Management, and Jasmine Knoll, our senior product marketing manager, are doing a webinar called Securing JFrog Artifactory. Find risky software in your repos. This is one's going to be really exciting, really practical mechanisms that you can employ to find risk within your artifact repositories. And then on March 27th, we're going to do the year in software supply chain threats, insights from RL's annual 2025 risk report. This is going to include our actual chief software architect and co-founder, Tomislav, as well as our director of editorial content, Paul Roberts, and Chris Hughes, the CEO of Acquia. That is going to be referencing a report that came out just yesterday that you can grab and read called the Software Supply Chain Risk Report. This is going to cover attacks on AI, crypto, open source, and commercial software. Last but not least, if you want to take a look at how we're surfacing these 6 risks, literally right now, without any login requirements, certainly no cost, we have a free resource called SpectraSure Community. In your browser, just type secure.software, hit enter, and you're going to go to this site. On this site, you can look at open source software that has been vetted by ReversingLabs and the technology we talked about today. We're going to surface all 6 of those risks, and you'll be able to see them, click around, get a sample of what a safe report looks like, and make safe decisions when building your next application. Again, thank you all so much for joining today. And at this point, I'm going to go into the question section to see what questions we might have. All right. Someone asked about XZ. We've covered that. How we would help with UA parser. We covered that. Andy, real quick, someone's interested in how 3CX fits the definition of a software supply chain attack. How would you kind of articulate how that is a poster child for software supply chain attacks?
Well, it fits in the same way that SolarWinds fits in. They had bad guys in their pipeline that tampered with the release. And so, supply chain means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Oh, hey, Jay, good to see you, bud. Yeah, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so, if it doesn't fit your example of a supply chain attack, that's cool. But ask yourself what controls you do have to address that scenario, whether you call it a supply chain or anything else. So, sorry, I don't have a better answer, but that's kind of the way I think of it.
No, that's a great answer. I appreciate that. And we are running short on time. I'm coming through here looking for more questions. A lot of great conversations. For this blog, Pippin, I don't want to sit here and read a blog and then and then answer it live on screen. But why don't we have a conversation after we digest that, and we can also get into your questions about any other questions that you might have at another time. But I do want to check out this CVSS is broken blog and give you a proper answer. I think the same for Silk Typhoon. We're going to actually do a lot on that coming up. So, Andy, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you have any thoughts on Silk Typhoon, or do you want to wait until we give it a proper
Yeah,
webinar
I think
blog?
Yeah, so Silk Typhoon, lots of moving parts. Again, I think the key is visibility, and I think we'll do something in the future that gets down to the weeds about that, but I think we can help.
Cool. One question that came in is, as a software consumer, I don't have access to the source code. How am I able to surface all these risks? Um, with complex binary technology, you actually don't need the source code. In fact, you're better off for it. You can take the complete binary, you can run it through the engine, and we're going to surface all those risks. So that's one of the things that's really powerful about this technology. I appreciate you asking. Um, all right. Any other questions? Let me see. I
Um,
open the
Question about
Q&A.
getting a certificate of attendance or getting those CPEs. So
Um, I'm not exactly sure how
Okay.
go about
And gang,
doing.
this is my first webinar, so we're gonna,
Oh, we
I
got the
don't know.
answer. They'll be sent tomorrow. So
Oh, hallelujah.
those of you who attended will be receiving those tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Very good. And everybody in the chat, there's a link, Secure Dot Software. That's a free resource, and it'll give you a unique kind of visibility into some of the larger open source packages out there. So check it out, take a look. I think you'll be pleased.
Yep. Okay, so the questions have slowed. Really engaged audience. I appreciate you all so much for both listening in and posting your questions and comments. If you think of anything else later on, feel free to reach out to the Reversing Labs team. We will route you to the correct person, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Andy, really appreciate your expertise here. That was really insightful, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. A lot of fun. Love to do it again sometime.
Well, careful what you wish for. We'll sign you
Yeah,
up.
I know, I know.
I,
With this audience, though, this is a great audience. You all were wonderful. So thank you.
I totally agree. Yeah, the audience made it. All right, gang. Thank you so much. I'll be closing the webinar. And again, feel free to reach out if you want to see a demo or anything else. Take care.